Let's take a look at an example of using the Sigma Score calculator worksheet to do a Sigma Score calculation for an example we looked at very early in our discussions. Think back to the SciPoc and PMAP presentation from early in this class that ended with some Sigma Score calculations. So let's look at how this spreadsheet would be used to actually track the Sigma Score used in those processes going through. So here's one for the campers in the example, and this little yellow box is taken directly out of the earlier presentation that said we defined a unit of quality for the campfire for the campers as 1 minute of safe warmth at one seat. Again, remember, we define our units such that we might have more or fewer units in some instances of the product, but all units will have the same number of opportunities for a defect. That's the definition of a unit in Six Sigma. In this particular case, we defined the problem as a four-dimensional problem. It's how many camping trips will we take, how many nights of campfires will we build, how many seats do we want to have around that campfire, and then how many minutes do we want it to burn. That's our hierarchy. So a minute of warmth in a seat and a fire on a camping trip is our unit. We'll come back to these estimates of numbers in a minute. Within that four-tier hierarchy, A, B, C, D, so I've hidden the rest of the spreadsheet. We only need this bottom level. There's two possible defects that can occur to the camper as customer. The fire might not be warm enough, meaning we haven't built a large enough fire to heat all those people at that distance, or someone could be injured or burned by an ember or a discharge coming out of that fire. We don't want either of those things to happen. So we have two opportunities, two defect lists per unit. In this particular case, we have 1,920 units for a single campfire, times the two is 3,840 opportunities, which is what we calculated back in that spreadsheet. 8 seats at 4 hours for two defect types come to 3,840 defect opportunities per campfire as we go through. Now we might have different numbers of campfires. You can adjust the spreadsheet accordingly, but this is the Sigma Score calculation for a single campfire as we go. So suppose on this particular campfire it turned out that 10% of the time the fire wasn't considered warm enough by the people sitting around it, and maybe 1% of the time it was discharging embers that were hitting people. So as soon as we start racking up defects in our process, the customer Sigma Score starts to fall. So the more defects we have, the lower the Sigma Score going through. We could also reuse this same spreadsheet to say, well, there are in this park maybe 20 camping trips a year averaging 4 nights each that each build a fire for maybe on average fewer people, maybe 5 people for 4 hours, and maybe for 3 hours. You can always adjust to say the average is only 3 hours, in which case now I'm looking at the range of campfires over all the camping trips that fit this criteria, so 72,000 options. Changing the number of units isn't going to affect the Sigma Score in this case because I'm estimating my defects per fire. But typically as you grow the population of product you're looking at, you're going to smooth out some of the exceptions, and maybe over the course of all of these fires only 2% consider it not warm enough, and maybe 0.01% get injured in some kind of process. So again, now the Sigma Score would end up being 3.67. So 144,000 opportunities to do one of those two things wrong, 2,160 opportunities across this population, a defect per unit of only 3/100ths, but 15,000 defects per million opportunities, which gives the Sigma Score, a fairly low Sigma Score of 3.67. Customer Sigma Scores are very sensitive to defects. It doesn't take much to knock them way off their Six Sigma. So even if I can cut the not warm defect in half down to 1%, my Sigma Score only climbs to 3.83. I've got to get a fractional percent on these to start to get anywhere near the upper scores. So that's how you do a simple Sigma Score calculation based on a SciPoc or PMAP analysis, which typically is fairly high level and you won't know all the details yet in the measure phase. Now that presentation had two different customers to it. The other one was the Ranger. Rangers also had their own definition of quality. So they might look at the number of camping trips, the number of nightly fires, how many hours they burn. Maybe they're not concerned with how many people are on the camping trip. They're concerned with the actions that take place during the fire. So the building of the fire, the stoking of the fire, and the extinguishing of the fire are the things that they're concerned about. It's three actions per hour as you go through in terms of stoking the fire. So in terms of their defects, there are some defects that only occur at the AB level, so on the given fire. So things that only happen once per fire would be AB violations. So something that goes wrong on the start of the fire or the extinguishing on the fire doesn't happen every hour of the fire, so you got to track them separately. So I could have a code violation, ember discharge, or an injury on the start of the fire, and a code violation, ember discharge, or an injury on the end of the fire as I go through. Okay. On the lowest level, the actual actions, and I'm looking at how many stokes per hour that I do. I keep stoking the fire. Here I could have a code violation, an ember discharge, or an injury. So I have 3 possible violations. Okay. In this case, times the 12 actionable hours going on is 3 things could go wrong on each stoke. So I have 36 opportunities for those defects. It's the 6 plus the 36 that says each campfire ends up with 42 opportunities for a discharge. So again, if I go through and estimate some of those potential violations, hopefully they're very, very small. But even at 1% of each type of error, if I plug all that in, my sigma score falls to 3.84. If I typically stoke the fire okay, I might have only code violations on starting and putting out the fire. I could end up with a higher sigma score on that. So the level of quality that the ranger sees in the campfire is based on different criteria than that we had for the campers. For the campers, it tended to be the person sitting at the fire. So how many people are at the fire was a key element going on. To the rangers, they're not interested in how many people are at the fire, just how well are the fire operations carrying on. So to say what is the sigma score of the campfire, you have to basically ask yourself which customer. The campers will have their own sigma score. The rangers will have their own sigma score. You've got to separate and do a different sigma score for every customer that you think has a stake in your overall operation.